This is Akashvani. We feature a literary talk by Vivekananda College Associate Professor Dr. Vijayalayan on literature and social consciousness.
What is literature? Well, try asking this question to a student of the subject and insist on him to give you an instantaneous answer. He will most probably give you one of two cliched responses. He will either tell you literature is a reflection of life, or he might tell you literature is a reflection of society. Both these definitions, of course, essentially mean the same thing. They simply mean that literature derives its basic inspiration from life experiences, which are played out, which are lived out in the society. But what makes the two definitions really interesting is the fact that they not only mean the same thing, but they also conceptualize literature in the exact same way, as a kind of mirror. Now, what we have to understand is that literature most certainly represents a mirror. But then, when we speak of literature as a mirror, we have to realize that it does not work like an actual mirror does. All that an actual mirror does is that it passively reflects everything that is in front of it. All that an actual mirror does is that it provides us with a replica image of whatever is in front of it. But that is not what the so-called mirror of literature provides us with. Literature does not passively reflect life or society. Rather, it actively recreates life and society. And this it does fundamentally through using the power of imagination. Now, this power of imagination, which is extremely vital as far as literature is concerned, is what that ultimately invests literature with a sense of social consciousness or social awareness. Here, we need to be clear about a very important point. When we speak of literature's ability to evoke social awareness or social consciousness, it is not enough that we only refer to its uplifting impact. We also must take into consideration simultaneously its ability to excite or entertain its audience. See, for anything to be critically stimulating or critically engaging, it has to be interesting in the first place. And this is particularly so as far as literature is concerned. If literature has to be engaging critically, it has to be entertaining. For example, Dr. Samuel Johnson, the first lexicographer in English, he said the aim of poetry was to instruct through delight. And that is precisely what literature should adopt as its philosophy. It should try to instruct, that is, raise social consciousness through the medium of delighting the audience. That is the best and the most effective way by which literature can perform its function of social consciousness. What follows is an explanation or an illustration of this point through a brief analysis of two novels that have been specifically chosen for this exact reason. The first novel that we're going to do an analysis of is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice was first published in the year 1813. Technically, it happens to be the second published work by Jane Austen, but it was the first novel that she actually finished. And it is estimated that from the time of its first publication till today, the novel has sold more than 20 million copies worldwide. It happens to be one of the most beloved novels for so many people across the world. The plot of the novel essentially focuses on a senior couple called the Bennets. The Bennets have 5 children and all of them are daughters. Mrs. Bennet, who is the wife, is extremely anxious to get all these 5 daughters of her married as quickly as possible. And what she does is that in the course of the narrative, she takes many efforts to set them up with probable suitors. And whenever she takes one of these efforts, it is extremely hilarious. So as far as entertainment value is concerned, this novel is very rich in it. But then, entertainment is not the only thing that this novel is all about. The novel also exposes an injustice in society. What exactly is this injustice? To understand what this injustice is, we need to in the first place understand the reason as to why Mrs. Bennet wants to get all her daughters married off so quickly. In England during the 19th century, women did not have the right to inherit the family property. The family property could be inherited only by a male heir, the son. And if, in case there was no son in the family, the property went by default to the closest male relative outside the family. Now, this is the problem that the Bennets face. They don't have a son. So, if something fatal happens to Mr. Bennet abruptly, the family property will go to the closest male relative outside the family. And if something like that happens, the Bennet sisters will be left stranded without any fortune. As their mother, naturally, Mrs. Bennet does not want her daughters to suffer this plight. So, she tries her utmost to get them off as quickly married as possible so that they will have a husband who will take care of them properly. So, what this novel ultimately does from a social point of view is that it tries to raise the consciousness about the need to rectify the legal system of England so that it can be made more fair from the women's perspective also. And when we look at the novel from this angle, we can even call it a feminist work of art. The second novel that we're going to take up for analysis also happens to be one of the most celebrated novels in the history of world literature. Perhaps even more celebrated than Pride and Prejudice. The novel in question is, of course, Oliver Twist, and it is by, as we all know, Charles Dickens. This novel was first published in the year 1837 and has been adapted ever since into so many different art forms. It has been adapted into movies, operas, dramas, and whatever form of art it has been adapted into, you find that the novel has presented its author with a great deal of success. Now, Oliver Twist, it must be said, is a novel that is totally different to Pride and Prejudice. Both the novels, of course, share one common point. They happen to be the second published novel of their respective authors. But here is where the similarity ends. Other than this coincidental similarity, you find that in every other way, both these novels are exact opposites. Pride and Prejudice is a domestic novel, and its strong suit is humor. But Oliver Twist is a social novel. So you find that it's a more serious and emotional novel. And it engages social issues more directly and obviously than Pride and Prejudice ever does. Focusing on the plot of the novel, we find that it essentially traces the progress of an orphan boy who is born and brought up in a workhouse. He undergoes many trials and tribulations in the course of the novel before he finally is able to connect with the remaining members of his family and win his rightful inheritance. So eventually the novel does have a happy ending, but then before he arrives at this happy ending, the title character, Oliver Twist, undergoes many miserable experiences. And you find that the social message which the novel tries to communicate are essentially exemplified in the many scenes of misery that Oliver Twist undergoes in the course of the plot. One such scene happens when Oliver Twist is captured by Fagin and his gang. Oliver Twist manages to escape from the workhouse and he makes it all the way to London. But once he is in the city, he is captured by a gang that is spearheaded by an underworld character known as Fagin. Fagin runs a gang of young boys whom he trains to pick pockets. So he is basically exploiting young boys to make money. And in this particular scene that we are talking about, Fagin is actually training these young boys how to pick pockets skillfully. It's actually a pretty humorous scene, to be honest. But then if we look at the scene closely, scrutinize it a bit more closely, then the appalling feature ingrained in it will be obvious to us. In 19th century England, people were pretty much aware of the fact that there was an underworld existing in London. but nobody ever talked about it openly because they did not know what was really going on, what was really happening in this underworld. But what Charles Dickens did in the novel was that he brought the underworld up close and personal into the hearts and minds of his audience. He showed them what happens in this underworld. He showed them the kind of characters who inhabited this underworld, and made it very clear to all his readers that unless and until something is done about this underworld, then the future of the city will be overrun with many burglars and thieves. Imagine a world where there are no smartphones. Imagine a world where there is no internet. Imagine a world where there is not even television. Well, if you're a person of today, it will be virtually impossible for you to imagine such a world. Such a world is something unthinkable for the people of today. But the fact of the matter is, all these things, smartphones, televisions, internet, which have become such an integral part of our life today, are recent contrivances. About 15 years ago, there was no smartphone. About 35 years ago, there was no internet. And about 50 years ago, there was even no television. Now, if you're a person of today, naturally, you would ask, how did people keep themselves engaged and entertained all those years ago without all these things available to them? Well, the simple answer is they read. They read a lot of literature. And that was the way they kept themselves occupied. Today, we have technology we can only dream of. We have gadgets to do practically everything that we want to do for us. We have everything available at a mouse click. All information, all knowledge that we want, we can procure by just clicking a mouse. But in spite of so much of sophistication today, the world in which we live today is precipitated by a crisis of moral values. And the only way by which this crisis can be fixed is by taking up the reading of literature seriously. Yes, there are so many apps today. Yes, there are so many social networking sites today that provide us with a lot of information. But can they also make us socially proactive? Can they also critically engage us? It's very doubtful whether they can. But literature certainly can. So as people of today, we should all make a conscious effort to go back in time and cultivate the habit of reading literature so that the future that is to come will be a critically enlightened one.
You just heard to a literary talk by VIVEKANANDA College Associate Professor Dr. Vijayalayan on literature and social consciousness. This program came to you from the studios of Akashvani, Chennai.